Starting with the spring game, I think our guys handled the spring game very well. We were trying to get about 80 snaps, and I think we got about that. And so we got the work that we needed with the first and second groups, and then we got a lot of young players reps. And so you kind of saw that second half, especially specifically in the fourth quarter, really playing a bunch of young guys, getting them film, getting them more opportunities to improve. And overall, we made it out healthy. We scored points. We got some stops. And so I think it was a very successful day. When you talk about spring ball in terms of the whole, I think we got what we wanted accomplished. We have brand new schemes, offense, defense, and special teams. And so I think we did a really good job of installing what we want to get done. I think our players by the end had a much better understanding of the why we're doing everything. And so overall feel very successful with what we did this spring. And so very much looking forward to a couple of weeks of those guys getting their bodies back and finishing finals. And then we'll be back at it June 1st with workouts. So very excited about this group, and they did a heck of a job getting better this spring.
Obviously, you're playing yourself, so it's bittersweet, but just starting with such a strong, explosive play right off the bat, that has to get you excited.
Yeah, I got me fired up. I mean, Damonte Bias is a really great player, and we thought he could develop. He struggled early, right? It was a lot different junior college football than playing here at the University of Idaho, so it took him a little bit of adjustment. But once that kid really found his groove, you can see the reason we brought him here. He's incredibly explosive, and he's going to be a weapon for us for sure. That was exciting first play.
And then just the option of Hayden there as well, him having explosive plays down the stretch as well. How clutch is that to have that dual threat?
Yeah. And we didn't have Ferrari Miller tonight. He hurt his ankle last week, and there's no reason to try to press him back for this scrimmage. But Kincheloe is a load, right? He's a guy that's played a lot of football here. It means a lot to him, and you kind of saw his running ability and, again, that contrast, right? That downhill physical style. But make no mistake, Kinch got some feet now. He got some feet, and he showed a little bit of wiggle and made some guys miss as well. So it was awesome to see him finish his spring career, right? He's a fifth-year senior. This will be his last spring. And just to see him kind of really make some things happen was pretty awesome to see.
What can you tell us about the order that we saw the backup QBs in?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably pretty accurate right now. Out of spring practice, I think Sawyer Tini was our clear number 2. But we got to keep getting better at that position. So there's, potential to bring a transfer in. We had a guy on campus this weekend that I believe will be a Vandal. So once he signs, we'll tell you who that is. But we want to continue to improve that room. But Sawyer certainly did enough this spring to kind of anoint him as the number 2. But obviously he'll have to go compete again once we get to fall camp.
You have a lot of depth at that position, and if you're still looking, is it anybody's game potentially for QB1?
I think Joshua Wood is our starting quarterback. He's done a phenomenal job. There isn't anything that he's done that would lead us to believe otherwise, but we want to be great in the position, and if we can add a player that makes us great, I think that's what we'll do.
Yeah, coaches, the first thing I noticed today is starting defense did a really good job of stopping the run. What was it specifically that they were getting done up front to execute?
I think 2 things. Number one, they just played with great effort. I mean, they played with really great effort really the entire time they were out there. And I think those guys are just playing fast. They understand their responsibilities. They understand the concepts. And I just think you're seeing them play much faster than a lot of them played a year ago. So I think that's development. Coach Malo has done a really good job, especially with the interior D-line. Coach Roberts has done a really good job. He did a good job last year. Matthias McLean was an all-conference player, and I think Coach Roberts was a big reason for that. But you're seeing those groups really develop. We had some transfers, but then we also had some young players, right? Make Apo has gotten significantly better. Lanui Myers is a freshman. He's supposed to be at prom right now, right? But he's gotten significantly better in 14 practices. So that group has definitely been one that's been a highlight, and it's something that we needed, right? We need a better pass rush, and we need to take the ball away. And I think those 2 things have definitely happened throughout spring.
You talked about how you accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish this spring. Were there any particular position groups or players that stood out to you over the course of the spring?
Yeah, a couple groups. We talked about that D-line group kind of as a whole, both defensive tackles and defensive ends. I thought our safeties group was probably might be the deepest position on our roster right now in terms of just the amount of players that we think can play winning football. And then those groups probably stood out the most. The tight ends, I thought, got significantly better. Noah West Barranco is a guy that I think can can play on Sunday if he does what he's supposed to in his development. And he's been a huge addition to that room. So those are probably the rooms that have stood out the most in terms of what we're looking for in terms of improvement, I would say.
Obviously, talking about the tight ends, half of the tight end's job is to be a guy that can get downfield and catch passes. Last year's team had somewhat of an inexperienced receiving room. Looking at going into this season now, how are you feeling about what the receiving core is looking like?
Yeah, all those guys are back. So anytime you can return a bunch of guys that know how the program works, know how the off season works, strength and conditioning, just the little things that you're not having to teach, I think that's huge. So having all those returners back was a big deal. Ryan Jeziaro was kind of banged up with a hammy. Tony Harsey kind of had a hammy. So we were pretty banged up at the position, but it got a lot of other guys reps. Two guys that really stood out all spring were, Marquand McCraney and Nolan McWilliams. And then Cage Reppin, who's a highly touted guy a couple years ago in the 24 class, really had a great second half of spring. So some guys got more opportunities and really showed that they could make some things happen. So I think it built our depth at receiver. And then, again, those additions to the tight ends, I know, like I said, with Noah and Chance Bogan and Gus Donnerberg, those guys have all done a really good job as receiving threats as well.
As for tonight's game, a lot of straight handoffs and stuff like that. Not a lot of passes where you did that by design, not to show anybody who might be watching.
We try to keep a little bit to some guessing. We don't want to have too much film out there on what we're doing. So we kept it pretty basic tonight as far as our offense and defense. Trying to do as much we can with our base schemes, right? Because that's really what we wanted to see anyway. Can our guys execute our base schemes? And I think they did a pretty good job of that, but definitely have some wrinkles that have not been seen.
Any more questions?
Yeah, you talked about Damonte Bias. Obviously, he had 60 rushing yards on the first drive of the game. And we also saw a pretty good performance from Carlos Matheny in the game. Between the backs and the linemen, how are you feeling about the running game right now?
Run game should be strong again. That was a big, strong suit for us last year, and we really returned everyone up front outside of an all-conference player, Nate Azzopardi. So that's a huge departure, but I think there's a lot of guys that have really started to step up. Tyler Skinner, Howard Stedford, those are two guys that really come to mind that have really stepped up. And so I think with that group almost fully intact, you bring in two really good transfer running backs. You got a veteran guy like Carlos, another veteran like Hayden Kincheloe. We got a freshman that's a very highly touted freshman that was here tonight, and Kenny Golston. We feel pretty good about that run game. We should be able to run in between the tackles, and obviously Damonte can do a little bit more with the football down the field too. So I think between those two groups, we should have a solid run game.
Now that you've wrapped up spring ball, what are some things you'd say this team does better than last year's team, and what are some things you still need to work on?
I think one thing for sure is I think we get after the passer a lot better than we did a year ago. It seems like, guys like the Augustus twins, Mari and Javen. Kai Richardson is a guy that kind of came back from injury towards the tail end of the spring, and he looks phenomenal rushing the passer. So I think pass rush is something that I think really stands out. And then, just takeaways, right? Interceptions. Our secondary was a lot more active this spring than they were last spring. And then on offense, I just think we're going to have a much more efficient passing game. That's something that I think Coach Shoemaker's done a really nice job of. And again, we weren't even full strength at receiver. So seeing what we did with guys that, are probably backups for us was really encouraging, because those guys will be ready to play too with the additional reps they got.
All right. Thank you, Coach.
Awesome. Thank you guys. V's up. Appreciate you guys.